Let's have a look at Hamlet's play within a play. Sometimes this is described as the endless mirror up to nature. But I think if we have a look at an earlier section of Hamlet, from Act 1, Scene 5, we can see that in some senses Hamlet's instructions to the actors goes on throughout the play. And this is probably the best place to start in looking at this. Hamlet, we know, is neither a philosopher nor a theologian, but he's an enthusiastic and remarkably informed amateur of the theatre. He knows how to act. He certainly seems to have spent a lot of time playing truant at places like the Globe Theatre in London and studying at Wittenberg. We know this because when the ghost exits, murmuring, "Remember me," and we hear Hamlet reminding the Globe audience that he is one of them. "Remember me, I, thou poor ghost, whilst memory holds a seat in this distracted globe." Later on, when we start looking at the actual play within a play, we're reminded that Hamlet probably was acted at the Globe during around the year 1600, but it was for Shakespeare a highly volatile text. And in 1601, he seems to have expanded its ironic commentary on the War of the Theatres that was taking place at the time with his friend and rival Ben Jonson. And yet even this poet's war is only a portion of the maelstrom that constitutes the sequence that goes from Act 2, Scene 2, around line 315, all the way through to Act 3, Scene 2, line 288. For almost 1,000 lines, a fourth of the play, Shakespeare cuts a gap into his representation of reality, or an imitation of an action. And the Globe's audience, on an afternoon watching this play back in 1601, would evidently more sophisticated perhaps than we were, in that they could accept an art that capriciously abandons the illusion of stage representation and then picks them up again. It's something that perhaps isn't as frequent in modern theatre. But since Shakespeare had this freedom with Hamlet, we might term this as a sort of meta-theatre. The idea that Shakespeare's greatest characters were free artists of themselves, and Hamlet ought to be the freest. But Shakespeare prevents this in order to maintain his own freedom, to make at least this one play a, quote, poem unlimited. So Hamlet is under some control by immersing us in plays within plays. We need to wonder, though, and ask the question, what exactly is Hamlet's intention? Now, I'm not going to bother filling you in on the plot exactly, because you'll pick that up reading the play yourself. But we need to try to get into the inner workings of Hamlet's thinking, his conscious self, in performing this play. I mean, he could have exposed Claudius's guilt in a number of ways. Why is it that he chose to put on the mousetrap? Let's have a look at a visual representation of this scene, because it's very theatrical in how it's poised, and the actors, we can see here Hamlet in this scene looking very suspiciously at Claudius. So, I mean, it's a highly stylized moment in the play. Of course, to us, the audience. Well, from Act 3, Scene 2, it begins with 45 lines in which Hamlet instructs and admonishes three of the players who are to enact his mousetrap. Now, the mousetrap's very interesting as a metaphor, but it also plays an important part in the plot of Hamlet. For in this poem unlimited of so many wonders, nothing is more central than Hamlet's excuses upon the purpose of playing. We see this in the following extract from Act 3, Scene 2. "Speak the speech, I pray you." And I'd encourage you to have a good look at what is written in those lines and how does it reflect Shakespeare's own voice, which is rarely offered in any of his plays other than perhaps some of his sonnets. With the plays themselves, we encounter an overactor or roaring boy, and it is to imitate Shakespeare Hamlet, who has just spoken, trippingly on the tongue, what I take to be the speech of the player king, but he's still too little undervalued by critics and directors. But if we have a very close look at what the player king's talking about here, he's very melodramatic, similar to Hamlet. He's offering his thoughts and musings on the loss of life. Grief joys, joy grieves. So we have these juxtaposing ideas throughout the entire play. And of course, the irony of it all is that In Hamlet trying to ensnare Claudius, the exact opposite occurs, with Hamlet himself, through his madness, exposing his own follies and weaknesses. So whose nature is mirrored here, Hamlet's or humankind? Do all of us will against our own character's fates, so that our designs are always thwarted? And if character is fate, so that there are no accidents, then our desires don't matter. Freud thought it was all over before our first birthday. Hamlet seems to give us an even less freedom from overdetermination. But if everything that ever happens to you is only a mirror of your own character, then what we see here is Shakespeare holding the mirror up to nature, which can be rather a dark activity. All of us can be fools just like Hamlet at some time. But is this Shakespeare's own vision, or is it even Hamlet's? For in Act 5 we see everything change, because it becomes evident Hamlet's ground of despair in his life that he's been enduring will return back from over the sea, and we won't really see the true Hamlet until he returns in the graveyard in Act 5 after he has been resurrected. Finally, here are some other resources you can use in your study of Hamlet's play within a play. The first is a good link to a Folger Shakespeare website that gives you a good overview. The second is an excellent prezi on the plot, characters, and actions within a play. And finally, much of the information that I used for this presentation was from Harold Bloom's